Chapter 15 of The Money Moon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 15, in which Adam explains. Adam?
Yes, Miss Anthea.
How much money did Mr. Bellew give you to buy the furniture? Miss Anthea was sitting in her great elbow chair, leaning forward with her chin in her hand, looking at him in the way which always seemed to Adam as though she could see into the very most recesses of his mind. Therefore Adam twisted his hat in his hands, and stared at the ceiling, and the floor, and the table before Miss Anthea, and the wall behind Miss Anthea, anywhere but at Miss Anthea.
You ax me how much it were, Miss Anthea?
Yes, Adam.
Well, it were a goodish sum.
Was it £50?
£50? repeated Adam in a tone of lofty disdain. No, Miss Anthea, it were not £50.
Do you mean it was more?
Ah, nodded Adam, I mean as it were a sight more. If you was to take the £50 you mention, add 20 more, and then another 20 to that, and then come to 10 more to that, why, then you'd be a bit nigher the figure.
£100!
exclaimed Anthea, aghast. Ah, £100! nodded Adam, rolling the words upon his tongue with great gusto. £100 were the sum, Miss Anthea.
Oh, Adam!
Lord love you, Miss Anthea, that were nothing. That were only a flea bite, as you might say. He give more, nigh double as much as that, for the sideboard.
Nonsense, Adam.
It be gospel true, Miss Anthea. That there sideboard were the plum of the sale, so to speak, and old Grimes had set his heart on it, d'ye see. Well, it were bid up to £86, and then old Grimes he goes 20 more, making it 106. Then, just as I thought it were all over, and just as that there old Grimes were beginning to swell hisself up with triumph, and get that red in the face as he were a sight to behold, Mr. Bellew, who'd been lighting his pipe all this time, up and says, 50 up, he says in his quiet way, making it £156, Miss Anthea, which were too much for Grimes, Lord! I thought as that there man were going to burst, Miss Anthea. And Adam gave vent to his great laugh at the mere recollection. But Anthea was grave enough, and the troubled look in her eyes quickly sobered him.
£156! she repeated in an awed voice. But it is awful.
Steepish, admitted Adam. Pretty steepish for an old sideboard, I'll allow, Miss Anthea, but you see it were a personal matter betwixt Grimes and Mr. Bellew. I began to think as they never would ha' left off biddin', and by George, I don't believe as Mr. Bellew ever would have left off biddin'. You see, there's something about that Mr. Bellew, whether it be his voice, or his eye, or his chin, I don't know, but there be something about him as says, very distinct, that if so be he should happen to set his mind on a thing, why, he's a-going to get it, and he ain't a-going to give in till he do get it. You see, Miss Anthea, he's so very quiet in his ways, and speaks so soft and gentle. Perhaps that's it. Say, for instance, he were to ax you for something, and you said, no. Well, he wouldn't make no fuss about it, not him. He'd just take it, that's what he'd do. As for that there sideboard, he'd have sat there a-bidding and a-bidding all night, I do believe.
But, Adam, why did he do it? Why did he buy all that furniture?
Well, to keep it from being took away, p'raps.
Oh, Adam, what am I to do?
Do, Miss Anthea?
The mortgage must be paid off, dreadfully soon, you know that, and I can't give the money back.
Why, give it back? No, of course not, Miss Anthea.
But I can't keep it.
Can't keep it, Miss Anthea, ma'am? And why not?
Because I'm very sure he doesn't want all those things. The idea is quite absurd, and yet, even if the hops do well, the money they bring will hardly be enough by itself, and so I was selling my furniture to make it up, and now, oh, what am I to do?" And she leaned her head wearily upon her hand. Now, seeing her distress, Adam, all sturdy loyalty that he was, must needs sigh in sympathy, and fell once more to twisting his hat until he had fairly wrung it out of all semblance to its kind, twisting and screwing it between his strong hands, as though he would fain wring out of it some solution to the problem that so perplexed his mistress. Then, all at once, the frown vanished from his brow, his grip loosened upon his unfortunate hat, and his eye brightened with a sudden gleam. "Miss Anthea," said he, drawing a step nearer, and lowering his voice mysteriously, "supposin' as I was to tell you that he did want that furniture." "Ah, and wanted it bad? Now how can he, Adam? It isn't as though he lived in England," said Anthea, shaking her head. "His home is thousands of miles away. He is an American, and besides—"
"Ah, but then, even a American may get married, Miss Anthea, ma'am," said Adam.
"Married?" she repeated, glancing up very quickly. "Adam, what do you mean?"
"Why, you must know," began Adam, wringing at his hat again, "ever since the day I found him asleep in your hay, Miss Anthea, ma'am, Mr. Bellew has been very kind and friendly-like. Mr. Bellew and me have smoked a good many sociable pipes together, and when men smoke together, Miss Anthea, they likewise talk together."
"Yes, well," said Anthea, rather breathlessly, and taking up a pencil that happened to be lying near to hand.
"And Mr. Bellew," continued Adam, heavily, "Mr. Bellew has done me the honour—"
Here, Adam paused to give an extra twist to his hat.
"The honour, Miss Anthea—"
"Yes, Adam?"
"Of confiding to me his hopes," said Adam slowly, finding it much harder to frame his well-meaning falsehood than he had supposed. "His hopes, hopes, Miss Anthea, of settling down very soon, and of marrying a fine young lady as he had his eye on a goodish time, having knowed her from childhood's hour, Miss Anthea, and as lives up to Lunnon."
"Yes, Adam?"
"Consequently, he bought all your furniture to set up housekeeping, don't you see?"
"Yes, I see, Adam." Her voice was low, soft, and gentle as ever, but the pencil was tracing meaningless scrawls in her shaking fingers.
"So you don't have to be nowise back'ard about keeping the money, Miss Anthea."
"Oh, no, of course not. I understand. It was just a business transaction."
"Ah, that's it, a business transaction," nodded Adam. "So, you'll put the money o' one side to help pay off the mortgage, eh, Miss Anthea?"
"Yes."
"If the 'ops come up to what they promised to come up to, you'll be able to get rid of old Grimes, for good and all, Miss Anthea."
"Yes, Adam."
"And you'll be quite easy in your mind now, Miss Anthea, about keeping the money?"
"Quite. Thank you, Adam, for telling me. You can go now."
"Why then, good night, Miss Anthea, ma'am. The mortgage is as good as paid. There ain't no such 'ops nowhere near so good as our'n be. And you're quite free of care, and happy-hearted, Miss Anthea?"
"Quite. Oh, quite, Adam." But, when Adam's heavy tread had died away, when she was all alone, she behaved rather strangely for one so free of care, and happy-hearted. Something bright and glistening splashed upon the paper before her, the pencil slipped from her fingers, and with a sudden, choking cry, she swayed forward, and hid her face in her hands. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of The Money Moon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Moneymoon, a Romance, by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 16, in which Adam proposes a game. To be or not to be? Bellew leaned against the mighty bole of King Arthur, and stared up at the moon with knitted brows. That is the question, whether I shall brave the slings and arrows and things, and speak tonight and have done with it, one way or another, or live on a while, secure in this uncertainty, to wait, whether I shall, at this so early stage, pit all my chances of happiness against the chances of losing her, and with her, Small Porges, bless him, and all the quaint and lovable beings of this wonderful Arcadia of mine. For, if her answer be no, what recourse have I? What is there left me but to go wandering forth again, following the wind, and with the gates of Arcadia shut upon me forever? To be or not to be? That is the question. "Be that you, Mr. Bellew, sir?" "Even so, Adam. Come, sit ye awhile, good knave, and gaze upon Dian's loveliness, and smoke, and let us converse of dead kings." "Why, kings ain't much in my line, sir, living or dead uns, me never having seen any, except a pictur, and that tore, though very lifelike. But why I were a-looking for you, was to ax you to back me up, and to, play the game, Mr. Bellew, sir." "Why, as to that, my good Adam, my gentle Daphnis, my rugged Euphemio, you may rely on me to the utmost. Are you in trouble? Is it counsel you need, or only money? Fill your pipe, and, while you smoke, confide your cares to me, put me wise, or, as your French cousins would say, make me au fait." "Well," began Adam, when his pipe was well alight, "in the first place, Mr. Bellew, sir, I begs to remind you, as Miss Anthea sold her furniture to raise enough money as, with what the ops will bring, might go to pay off the mortgage, for good and all, sir." "Yes." "Well, tonight, sir, Miss Anthea calls me into the parlour to ax, or as you might say, inquire as to the why, and likewise the wherefore of you a-buying all that furniture." "Did she, Adam?" "Ah! Why did he do it?" says she. "Well, to keep it from being took away, p'raps," says I, sharp as any gimlet, sir. "Good!" nodded Bellew. "Ah! But it weren't no good, sir," returned Adam, "because she says as 'ow your own being in America, you couldn't really need the furniture, nor yet want the furniture, and blessed if she wasn't talking of handing you the money back again." "Hum!" said Bellew. "Seeing which, sir, and because she must have that money if she 'opes to keep the roof of Dapplemere over her 'ead, I there and then made up, or as you might say, concocted a story, an anecdote, or a yarn, upon the spot, Mr. Bellew, sir." "Most excellent Machiavelli. Proceed." "I told her, sir, as you bought that furniture on account of you being wishful to settle down, whereat she starts and looks at me with her eyes big and surprised like. I told her, likewise, as you had told me on the quiet, or as you might say, confidential, that you bought that furniture to set up housekeeping on account of you being on the pint of marrying a fine young lady up to Lunnon." "What?" Bellew didn't move, nor did he raise his voice. Nevertheless, Adam started back, and instinctively threw up his arm. "You told her that?" "I did, sir." "But you knew it was a confounded lie." I knowed it, but I'd tell 100, thousands o' lies, confounded or otherwise, to save Miss Anthea." "To save her?" "From ruination, sir, from losing Dapplemere Farm, and everything she has in the world. Lord love ye, the ops could never bring in by theirselves all the £3,000 as is owing. It ain't to be expected. But if that £3,000 ain't paid over to that dirty Grimes by next Saturday week as ever was, that dirty Grimes turns Miss Anthea out of Dapplemere, with Master Georgie and poor little Miss Priscilla. And what'll become of them then? I don't know. Lord, when I think of it, the old Adam do rise up in me to that extent as I'm minded to take a pitchfork and go and skewer that there Grimes to his own chimbley corner. You see, Mr. Bellew, sir," he went on, seeing Bellew was silent still,
Miss Anthea be that proud and independent that she'd never a took your money, sir, if I hadn't told her that there lie. So that's why I did tell her that there lie." "I see," nodded Bellew. "I see, yes. You did quite right. You acted for the best, and you did quite right, Adam. Yes, quite right." "Thank ye, sir." "And so, this is the game I am to play, is it?" "That's it, sir. If she asks you, 'Are you going to get married?' you tell her, 'Yes, to a lady as you've knowed from your childhood's hour, living in London.' That's all, sir." "That's all, is it, Adam?" said Bellew slowly, turning to look up at the moon again. "It doesn't sound very much, does it? Well, I'll play your game, Adam. Yes, you may depend on me." "Thank ye, Mr. Bellew, sir. Thank ye, sir. Though I do hope as you'll excuse me for taking such liberties, and making so free with your art, and your affections, sir." "Oh, certainly, Adam. The cause excuses everything." "Then, good night, sir." "Good night, Adam." So, this good, well-meaning Adam strode away, proud on the whole of his night's work, leaving Bellew to frown up at the moon, with teeth clenched tight upon his pipe stem. End of Chapter 16. Chapter 17 of The Money Moon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance, by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 17. How Bellew Began the Game. Now in this life of ours, there be games of many and divers sorts, and all are calculated to try the nerve, courage, or skill of the player, as the case may be. Bellew had played many kinds of games in his day, and, among others, had once been famous as a right tackle on the Harvard 11. Upon him he yet bore certain scars received upon a memorable day when Yale, flushed with success, saw their hitherto invincible line rent and burst asunder, saw a figure torn, bruised, and bleeding, flash out and away down the field to turn defeat into victory, and then to be borne off honorably to hospital and bed. If Bellew thought of this, by any chance, as he sat there, staring up at the moon, it is very sure that, had the choice been given him, he would joyfully have chosen the game of torn flesh and broken bones, or any other game, no matter how desperate, rather than this particular game that Adam had invented, and thrust upon him. Presently Bellew knocked the ashes from his pipe, and rising, walked on slowly toward the house. As he approached, he heard someone playing the piano, and the music accorded well with his mood, or his mood with the music, for it was haunting, and very sweet, and with a recurring melody in a minor key, that seemed to voice all the sorrow of humanity, past, present, and to come. Drawn by the music, he crossed the rose garden, and, reaching the terrace, paused there, for the long French windows were open, and from where he stood, he could see Anthea seated at the piano. She was dressed in a white gown of some soft, clinging material, and among the heavy braids of her hair was a single great red rose. And, as he watched, he thought she had never looked more beautiful than now, with the soft glow of the candles upon her, for her face reflected the tender sadness of the music. It was in the mournful droop of her scarlet lips, and the sombre depths of her eyes. Close beside her sat little Miss Priscilla, busy with her needle as usual. But now she paused, and lifting her head in her quick, bird-like way, looked up at Anthea, long and fixedly. "Anthea, my dear," she said suddenly, "I'm fond of music, and I love to hear you play, as you know, but I never heard you play quite so dolefully? Oh, dear me, no, that's not the right word, nor dismal, but I mean something between the two." "I thought you were fond of Grieg, Aunt Priscilla." "So I am, but then, even in his gayest moments, poor Mr. Grieg was always breaking his heart over something or other, and, oh, gracious! There's Mr. Bellew at the window. Oh, pray come in, Mr. Bellew, and tell us how you liked Peterday, and the muffins." "Thank you," said Bellew, stepping in through the long French window, "but I should like to hear Miss Anthea play again, first, if she will." But Anthea, who had already risen from the piano, shook her head. "I only play when I feel like it, to please myself and Aunt Priscilla," said she, crossing to the broad, low window seat, and leaning out into the fragrant night. "Why then?"
said Bellew, sinking into the easy chair that Miss Priscilla indicated with a little stab of her needle. "Why then, the muffins were delicious, Aunt Priscilla, and Peterday was just exactly what a one-legged mariner ought to be." "And the shrimps, Mr. Bellew?" inquired Miss Priscilla, busy at her sewing again. "Out-shrimped all other shrimps soever," he answered, glancing to where Anthea sat with her chin propped in her hand, gazing up at the waning moon, seemingly quite oblivious of him. "And did he pour out the tea?" inquired Miss Priscilla, "from the china pot with the blue flowers and the Chinese mandarin fanning himself? And very awkward, of course, with his one hand, I don't mean the mandarin, Mr. Bellew, and very full of apologies?" "He did." "Just as usual, yes, he always does, and every year he gives me 3 lumps of sugar, and I only take 1, you know. It's a pity," sighed Miss Priscilla, "that it was his right arm, a great pity." And here she sighed again, and, catching herself, glanced up quickly at Bellew, and smiled to see how completely absorbed he was in contemplation of the silent figure in the window seat. "But, after all, better a right arm than a leg," she pursued, "at least I think so." "Certainly," murmured Bellew. "A man with only 1 leg, you see, would be almost as helpless as an old woman with a crippled foot." "Who grows younger and brighter every year," added Bellew, turning to her with his pleasant smile. "Yes, and I think, prettier." "Oh, Mr. Bellew!" exclaimed Miss Priscilla, shaking her head at him reprovingly, yet looking pleased none the less. "How can you be so ridiculous, good gracious me!" "Why, it was the Sergeant who put it into my head." "The Sergeant?" "Yes, it was after I had given him your message about peaches, Aunt Priscilla, and—" "Oh dear heart!" exclaimed Miss Priscilla at this juncture, "Prudence is out to night, and I promised to bake the bread for her, and here I sit chatting and gossiping, while that bread goes rising and rising all over the kitchen." And Miss Priscilla laid aside her sewing, and, catching up her stick, hurried to the door. "And I was almost forgetting to wish you many happy returns of the day, Aunt Priscilla," said Bellew, rising. At this familiar appellation, Anthea turned sharply, in time to see him stoop, and kiss Miss Priscilla's small, white hand, whereupon Anthea must needs curl her lip at his broad back. Then, he opened the door, and Miss Priscilla tapped away, even more quickly than usual. Anthea was half sitting, half kneeling among the cushions in the corner of the deep window, apparently still lost in contemplation of the moon. So much so, that she did not stir, or even lower her upward gaze when Bellew came and stood beside her. Therefore, taking advantage of the fixity of her regard, he once more became absorbed in her loveliness. Surely a most unwise proceeding, in Arcadia by the light of a midsummer moon, and he mentally contrasted the dark, proud beauty of her face with that of all the women he had ever known, to their utter and complete disparagement. "Well?" inquired Anthea, at last perfectly conscious of his look, and finding the silence growing irksome, yet still with her eyes averted. "Well, Mr. Bellew?" "On the contrary," he answered, "the moon is on the wane." "The moon?" she repeated. "Suppose it is, what then?" "True happiness can only come riding astride the full moon, you know. You remember old Nannie told us so." "And you believed it?" she inquired scornfully. "Why, of course," he answered in his quiet way. Anthea didn't speak, but once again the curl of her lip was eloquent. "And so," he went on, quite unabashed, "when I behold happiness riding astride the full moon, I shall just reach up in the most natural manner in the world, and take it down, that it may abide with me world without end." "Do you think you will be tall enough?" "We shall see, when the time comes." "I think it's all very ridiculous," said Anthea. "Why then, suppose you play for me, that same plaintive piece you were playing as I came in, something of Grieg's I think it was. Will you, Miss Anthea?" She was on the point of refusing, then, as if moved by some capricious whim, she crossed to the piano, and dashed into the riotous music of a Polish dance. As the wild notes leapt beneath her quick brown fingers, Bellew, seated near by, kept his eyes upon the great red rose in her hair, that nodded slyly at him with her every movement. And surely, in all the world, there had never bloomed a more tantalizing, more wantonly provoking rose than this. Wherefore, Bellew, very wisely, turned his eyes from its glowing temptation. Doubtless observing which, the rose, in evident desperation, nodded and swayed, until it had fairly nodded itself from its sweet resting place, and, falling to the floor, lay within Bellew's reach. Whereupon, he promptly stooped, and picked it up, and, even as with a last crashing chord Anthea ceased playing, and turned, in that same moment he dropped it deftly into his coat pocket. "Oh, by the way, Mr. Bellew," she said, speaking as if the idea had but just entered her mind, "what do you intend to do about all your furniture?" "Do about it?" he repeated, settling the rose carefully in a corner of his pocket, where it would not be crushed by his pipe. "I mean, where would you like it stored until you can send and have it taken away?" "Well, I, rather thought of keeping it where it was, if you didn't mind." "I'm afraid it will be impossible, Mr. Bellew." "Why then, the barn will be an excellent place for it. I don't suppose the rats and mice will do it any real harm, and as for the damp, and the dust—" "Oh, you know what I mean!" exclaimed Anthea, beginning to tap the floor impatiently with her foot. "Of course we can't go on using the things, now that they are your property. It wouldn't be right." "Very well," he nodded, his fingers questing anxiously after the rose again. "I'll get Adam to help me to shift it all into the barn to-morrow morning." "Will you please be serious, Mr. Bellew?" "As an owl," he nodded. "Why then, of course you will be leaving Dapplemere soon, and I should like to know exactly when, so that I can make the necessary arrangements." "But you see, I am not leaving Dapplemere soon, or even thinking of it." "Not?" she repeated, glancing up at him in swift surprise. "Not until you bid me." "I? You? But I understood that you intend to settle down." "Certainly," nodded Bellew, transferring his pipe to another pocket altogether, lest it should damage the rose's tender petals. "To settle down has lately become the, ambition of my life." "Then pray," said Anthea, taking up a sheet of music, and beginning to study it with attentive eyes, "be so good as to tell me what you mean." "That necessarily brings us back to the moon again," answered Bellew. "The moon?" "The moon." "But what in the world has the moon to do with your furniture?" she demanded, her foot beginning to tap again. "Everything. I bought that furniture with one eye on the moon, as it were. Consequently the furniture, the moon, and I are bound indissolubly together." "You are pleased to talk in riddles, to night, and really, Mr. Bellew, I have no time to waste over them, so if you will excuse me—" "Thank you for playing to me," he said, as he held the door open for her. "I played because I felt like it, Mr. Bellew." "Nevertheless, I thank you." "When you make up your mind about the furniture, please let me know." "When the moon is at the full, yes." "Can it be possible that you are still harping on the wild words of poor old Nannie?" she exclaimed, and once more she curled her lip at him. "Nannie is very old, I'll admit," he nodded, "but surely you remember that we proved her right in one particular. I mean, about the tiger mark, you know." Now, when he said this, for no apparent reason, the eyes that had hitherto been looking into his, proud and scornful, wavered, and were hidden under their long, thick lashes. The colour flamed in her cheeks, and, without another word, she was gone. End of Chapter 17. Chapter 18 of The Money Moon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance, by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 18. How the Sergeant went upon his guard. The Arcadians, one and all, generally follow that excellent maxim which runs, Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, and wealthy, and wise. Healthy they are, beyond a doubt, and, in their quaint, simple fashion, profoundly wise. If they are not extraordinarily wealthy, yet are they generally blessed with contented minds which, after all, is better than money, and far more to be desired than fine gold. Now whether their general health, happiness, and wisdom is to be attributed altogether to their early-to-bed proclivities, is perhaps a moot question. Howbeit, to-night, long after these weary Arcadians had forgotten their various cares and troubles in the blessed oblivion of sleep, for even Arcadia has its troubles, Bellew sat beneath the shade of King Arthur alone with his thoughts. Presently, however, he was surprised to hear the house door open, and close very softly, and to behold, not the object of his meditations, but Miss Priscilla coming towards him. As she caught sight of him in the shadow of the tree, she stopped and stood leaning upon her stick as though she were rather disconcerted. "Aunt Priscilla!" said he, rising. "Oh, it's you!" she exclaimed, just as though she hadn't known it all along. "Dear me, Mr. Bellew, how lonely you look, and dreadfully thoughtful! Good gracious!" And she glanced up at him with her quick, girlish smile. "I suppose you are wondering what I am doing out here at this unhallowed time of night? It must be nearly 11 o'clock. Oh dear me, yes you are. Well, sit down and I'll tell you. Let us sit here, in the darkest corner. There. Oh dear heart, how bright the moon is, to be sure." So saying, Miss Priscilla ensconced herself at the very end of the rustic bench, where the deepest shadow lay. "Well, Mr. Bellew," she began, "as you know, to-day is my birthday. As to my age, I am, let us say, just turned 21, and, being young and foolish, Mr. Bellew, I have come out here to watch another very foolish person, a ridiculous old Sergeant of Hussars, who will come marching along very soon to mount guard in full regimentals, Mr. Bellew, with his busby on his head, and his braided tunic and dolman, and his great big boots, and with his spurs jingling, and his sabre bright under the moon." "So then, you know he comes?" "Why, of course I do, and I love to hear the jingle of his spurs, and to watch the glitter of his sabre. So, every year, I come here, and sit among the shadows, where he can't see me, and watch him go, marching, up and down, and to and fro, until the clock strikes 12, and he goes marching home again. Oh dear me, it's all very foolish, of course, but I love to hear the jingle of his spurs." "And have you sat here watching him every year?" "Every year." "And has he never guessed you were watching him?" "Oh, good gracious me, of course not." "Don't you think, Aunt Priscilla, that you are just a little cruel?" "Cruel? Why, what do you mean?" "I gave him your message, Aunt Priscilla." "What message?" "That, to-night, the peaches were riper than ever they were." "Oh!" said Miss Priscilla, and waiting expectantly for Bellew to continue, but, as he was silent, she glanced at him, and seeing him staring at the moon, she looked at it also. And after she had gazed for perhaps half a minute, as Bellew was still silent, she spoke, though in a very small voice indeed. "And what did he say?" "Who?" enquired Bellew. "Why, the Sergeant, to be sure." "Well, he gave me to understand that a poor old soldier, with only one arm left, must be content to stand aside, always, and hold his peace, just because he was a poor, maimed old soldier. Don't you think that you have been just a little cruel, all these years, Aunt Priscilla?" "Sometimes one is cruel only to be kind," she answered. "Aren't the peaches ripe enough after all, Aunt Priscilla?" "Over-ripe!" she said bitterly. "Oh, they are over-ripe." "Is that all, Aunt Priscilla?" "No," she answered, "no. There's this," and she held up her little crutch stick. "Is that all, Aunt Priscilla?" "Oh, isn't that enough?" Bellew rose. "Where are you going? What are you going to do?" she demanded. "Wait," said he, smiling down at her perplexity, and so he turned, and, crossing to a certain corner of the orchard, when he came back, He held out a great, glowing peach towards her. "You were quite right," he nodded. "It was so ripe that it fell at a touch." But as he spoke, she drew him down beside her in the shadow. "Hush!" she whispered. "Listen!" Now, as they sat there, very silent, faint and far away upon the still night air, they heard a sound, a silvery, rhythmic sound it was, like the musical clash of fairy cymbals which drew rapidly nearer and nearer. And Bellew felt that Miss Priscilla's hand was trembling upon his arm as she leaned forward, listening with a smile upon her parted lips, and a light in her eyes that was ineffably tender. Nearer came the sound, and nearer, until presently, now in moonlight, now in shadow, there strode a tall, martial figure in all the glory of braided tunic, and furred dolman, the 3 chevrons upon his sleeve, and many shining medals upon his breast. A stalwart, soldierly figure, despite the one empty sleeve, who moved with the long, swinging stride that only the cavalryman can possess. Being come beneath a certain latticed window, the Sergeant halted, and, next moment, his glittering sabre flashed up to the salute. Then, with it upon his shoulder, he wheeled, and began to march up and down, his spurs jingling, his sabre gleaming, his dolman swinging, his sabre glittering, each time he wheeled, while Miss Priscilla, leaning forward, watched him wide-eyed, and with hands tight clasped. Then, all at once, with a little fluttering sigh, she rose. Thus, the Sergeant, as he marched to and fro, was suddenly aware of one who stood in the full radiance of the moon, and with one hand outstretched towards him. And now, as he paused, disbelieving his very eyes, he saw that in her extended hand she held a great ripe peach. "Sergeant," she said, speaking almost in a whisper, "oh, Sergeant, won't you take it?" The heavy sabre thudded down into the grass, and he took a sudden step towards her. But even now he hesitated, until, coming nearer yet, he could look down into her eyes. Then he spoke, and his voice was very hoarse and uneven. "Miss Priscilla?" he said. "Priscilla? Oh, Priscilla!" And with the word, he had fallen on his knees at her feet, and his strong, solitary arm was folded close about her. End of chapter 18.